So Ariba, just a heads up, I'm starting up the Facebook feed as well.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so it's 11:01. We'll just give it another minute or two to wait for more attendees to show up, and then we will begin. All right, I'm gonna start talking now. We are streaming on Facebook Live as well. I just want to remind the audience and those watching on Facebook Live that you can either put your comments in the comment section for Facebook Live or put them in the Q&A box on Zoom. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 5th installment of OpenSV's webinar series, Passion for Public Service. The purpose of this webinar series is to highlight professionals who have dedicated their career and life to public service. We are so honored to have Maimona Afzal here with us today. I want to quickly talk about Open and this webinar series and introduce myself as well. OPEN stands for Organization of Pakistani Entrepreneurs of North America. We currently have 13 global chapters, and our Silicon Valley chapter is one of the largest ones and most prominent ones. OPEN is a network of global entrepreneurs and professionals. I am so honored to have started my own professional journey with OpenSV. I joined the youth board when I was only 13 years old. I was one of the first youth board members. Since then, I have continued to serve as a volunteer for Open. And right now, I currently am a third-year undergraduate student at American University in Washington, D.C. I also serve as the Inclusivity and Equity Director for DC College Democrats. But my most exciting opportunity right now is serving as the Communications Director for Georgette Gomez's congressional campaign to serve California's 53rd District. I want to thank you again, Maimona, for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about your run for a seat on the Franklin McKinley School Board. I'm going to actually open the floor up for you to introduce yourself. Please just talk about who you are, where you were raised, where you went to school and college, and your run for this seat.
Thank you so much again for having me. It's really an honor to be here as well and to engage with this organization right here in the Silicon Valley. So again, my name is Maimona Afzal. I am a public school special education teacher and elected school board member here in San Jose, California. Let's see, where I was raised. I grew up actually here in East San Jose. And so I've spent a lot of time, attending a lot of public events or, organizations locally. Went to school here in the Silicon Valley as well. And For college, I did attend San Jose State for my bachelor's degree in preparation for teaching, and then as well as my master's in credentials at Loyola Marymount University down in Southern California. So I'd say the real start to my professional career was actually, here just locally in San Jose, particularly with the San Jose Public Library system. I started volunteering and with their after-school homework club program. So running that with some volunteers and also with their Reading to Children program. And one of the things I immediately noticed was there was this kind of stark divide between the types of resources that kids and families have access to. And that, directly impacted their ability to make progress or to, have this pathway of learning and opportunity. So I think that's definitely something that drew me to education particularly, but have been engaged in that work since.
Yeah, amazing. I want to talk more about your motivations and inspirations to be in public service. I know especially as a Pakistani American Muslim, it's hard to put yourself out there. So what serves as your motivation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I was quite content in my classroom, just doing the work that I do as a teacher. So I teach at a public middle school in special education. And so, I had been doing that for a couple of years. And really, I would say one thing that really drew me to understand even what public service meant was an Islamophobic incident, or actually, I should say multiple incidents that happened shortly after the 2016 presidential election. And so basically over a series of incidents that were targeting me and other Muslim women who wore the hijab at my school site, we were targeted. And so I think the final straw for me was really on 9/11, my classroom was vandalized. And that was really horrifying to me to know that I grew up in this community, that the majority of my students are also students who are undocumented, their families are immigrants, they're second language learners. And so it was really alarming to me that this would be happening in a place as diverse as the Silicon Valley, right here in the Bay Area. And so it really prompted me to look at, okay, well, who makes these policies about how to respond to incidents like this, how to prevent incidents like this from ever happening, right? What kind of school environment or community environment are we fostering? Because really, it's not the kids' faults. To me, it's a matter of we haven't done a good enough job educating people about things like xenophobia and Islamophobia and these types of things that are directly targeting members of our community and creating an unsafe environment. And so I decided to speak publicly about my experiences and went to the school board level. And that kind of opened my eyes to the realm of public service and the ways that you can advocate for specific policies and actually work on that legislative process. So when I heard about an opening on the Franklin McKinley School Board, I thought, what, now's my chance. If I really want to continue being able to do this work and have a seat at the table, then I have to be willing to take the risks. Just like I asked my students to take risks and to try new things and to learn, then I too have to be willing to do that if I'm really committed to this. And so I was fortunate enough to first initially be appointed to that seat on the Franklin McKinley School Board, and then was elected in 2018 to serve out the remainder of that term.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through those experiences. It's so unfortunate that we live in a climate that fosters such xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic rhetoric. And I'm so happy that you're doing everything you can to make sure that we combat that. So my next question kind of has to do with what you already talked about. But I know when we put ourselves at risk and we put ourselves out there, we often need a really strong support system. And a lot of our actions are based off of the influences that we have in our life. So can you talk about different influencers in your life and how they've shaped your views and prepared you for both your professional and public life?
Yes, I would definitely say my family has been an incredible source of both inspiration, influence, and support. The work that happens in public service when you're in the public eye is not easy. It involves a lot of risks. It involves, constantly being under the microscope. And so being able to learn from, the experiences of my family, particularly, my parents and my grandparents who were immigrants, right? And, had to deal with a lot of that xenophobia or discrimination just as people in this country. And so being able to see how they were able to stand up for their rights, articulate and advocate for themselves in some really challenging situations has always been a really important part of what influences my ability, to be able to articulate myself and stand my ground. I would say, there's a lot that happens, and I know particularly in the Pakistani community, right? A lot of individuals who come here, like my parents or my father, who came here to study and became an engineer, that his story or his, the struggles that he went through, being in a new environment, new culture, and being able to, find a pathway for himself to support his family. That's all sources of inspiration that I depend on regularly to find my own pathway forward as well.
Yeah, of course. I want to also quickly remind the people in attendance that you can submit your questions that we will cover at the end of the webinar in the Q&A box for Zoom. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can add those questions in the comment section. Awesome. Okay, so my next question again has to do with your identity as a Pakistani American. You've talked about how Islamophobia has been present in your life and in your classroom. How has your identity as a Pakistani Muslim American shaped your commitment to public policy? And how has Islam been possibly a motivating factor as well?
Yeah, so, there's so much of my identity. It's not something, as a visible Muslim woman and as a woman of color, it's not something I can necessarily hide. And so it's very apparent, even from the first time that I'm meeting individuals or when they're interacting with my campaign, my website, in the past when we had been doing canvassing work prior to COVID. And so it's a matter of looking at, what does my identity and what do my experiences help me bring to the table? Why is it so important that I have a seat at this table to be able to make decisions and influence, the lives of, 7,000 students and their families and maintaining that $100 million budget? What are the ways that my lens, helps me see areas that others potentially may not? One area of that is, I grew up speaking Urdu, was my first language. And so knowing the value of, respecting and acknowledging that being multilingual is a strength, especially in this day and age. And so when we're looking at things like our programs, like we just started dual language immersion programs in our school district, in the Franklin McKinley School District, in Spanish and Vietnamese. And our Vietnamese program was the first program here in Northern California, where families had that option to have their kids learn both English and Vietnamese. And so to me, it's about, recognizing that these aspects of my identity, being a multilingual speaker, that's important. And that's a trait that, or a skill we should be honoring and valuing in our society. And that's one way that we can directly, uplift that in our policies. For example, starting up these programs. So I think those are some ways that the policy work really directly impacts that. And of course, there's the values, right? As a Muslim, there's values of public service. There's values of standing up for what's right. That's what we're taught. And so being able to make sure that those values are what I'm living by and how I'm making my decisions, right, more broadly are definitely important. And it also serves as a broader example. A lot of times positive images of Muslims are not what we see in media or just in general in the conversations. And so it's one way to be able to say, this is what ordinary Muslims are doing. These are the types of ways that we're engaging in our community. And it's not always what you see on TV. and being able to lead by that example and show some real instances of what Muslims are actually about.
Yeah, that was very beautifully put. And it leads me to my next question, because I know being a very like a present like woman of color, being a present Muslim, it can lead to a sense of trauma and struggle that you live with on a daily basis. So how has being a community leader helped you heal, or really think about the experiences that you've gone through on a personal level? Obviously, like, you are doing so much. You're in the public eye, you're a very visible Muslim, people can see that all the time. But on a personal level, how are you dealing with the racial and cultural bias that you experience?
That's another great question. And honestly, it wasn't something I had thought about going through this process. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to run for, public office to be able to heal from these experiences. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of been the catalyst to be able to process a lot of these experiences that I've gone through, even to the extent of, one of the big issues with that I had faced specifically and being targeted, and the bullying aspect of what happens in our school system. It was really, it was very empowering to be a part of the process to change state level policies that now require all teachers and administrators to be trained on how to respond to bullying in effective ways. And so even knowing that, those experiences just didn't happen just to happen, that yes, they were very challenging and traumatic to go through. And, I wouldn't wish anyone that upon anyone. But the fact that I was able to learn so much from it and be able to make a difference and contribute to these new realities, to hopefully prevent, students and other teachers, other people working in the education realm from experiencing that is incredibly empowering. And it has, continued to inspire me to contribute and figure out other issues that need to be addressed.
I'm so glad that this experience has been empowering and healing. And I just want you to know that as, a 20-year-old myself, you're an inspiration to me, and seeing your journey, seeing you heal and feel empowered, that helps me feel empowered. It makes me feel like I can do it too. And that, I'm so glad to have mentors and community leaders like you in our Silicon Valley that can help me learn and help me grow. So thank you for that. I want to transition. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just thank you. And that's what this, to me, that's what this work is really about. It's not about me. This is about our entire community. This is about other young people seeing like, this is a reality that I can get to. This is a pathway that I should consider as a way to get involved. When I started on the board, I was the youngest woman elected in Santa Clara County, and currently still the youngest, elected person in the county. And so that to me is it's a way to show people that other young people that, young people are leaders too. They're not leaders of the future, they're leaders of right now, and they can engage in that work now.
Yeah, thank you so much. That really means a lot. And I'm sure any other youth that are watching this, or even people older, it can really resonate with that. I'm so excited that you're talking to us about this, because again, I really do feel very empowered. Okay, so I want to transition a little bit, and I want to talk about the digital divide and digital equity. I know your platform talks a lot about the digital divide and the need for digital equity. So how would you suggest individuals who aren't necessarily part of the public policy industry to get more involved and, become impactful in their own way? Especially, the open SV community. Generally, most people are involved in tech companies. So what is something that they can do to become more involved in public policy?
Yeah, no, the idea or concept of digital equity, especially here in the Silicon Valley, has really been brought to light due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say, a lot more individuals and families are experiencing, just how heavy hit, just how much of an influence access to, digital resources are during this time, because everything is virtual. And so that's something that really drove me to participate, be an active participant and policymaker around, an advocate around digital equity. And so one of the things that, that I've been able to engage in is co-founding the Digital Equity Coalition. And so as a coalition, we started off as a group of school board members and educators who really just saw the need and the scope of what this problem looks like. During a pandemic, our families and community members, residents in this area need access to the internet, even just to find, food stamps services, community pantries, access to COVID-19 testing sites, telehealth and telemedicine. And so having access to the internet, having access to those devices is incredibly important. And really it becomes a life essential. And so one of the ways I think that a lot of individuals, whether you're in the education realm or not, because I started off in this realm as a teacher, is seeing the fact that my students couldn't access learning and couldn't access all of these different, resources that they need to live and learn and thrive. So that's kind of was my introduction to this topic, but really it's a topic that, impacts our entire communities, whether you're in education or not. And so I would say some specific ways to get involved. At this point, there has been policy, so some level of action taken at the local level. So both in the city of San Jose and at the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors level. So with our advocacy, which started back in March, we were able to actually advocate successfully, and over $15.3 million cumulatively has been invested by the county and the city of San Jose to address the digital divide. So what that's looked like is it's been able to distribute devices and hotspot resources to 15,000 of the most vulnerable families here in Santa Clara County. And that work, it's a short-term solution. And so one of the things I would share is, in order to get to that process, it really took a lot of organization and advocacy. So things like sending letters to your local elected officials, sending emails, following up with phone calls, speaking during public comments during board meetings, to really get our leaders to recognize and amplify the call to this particular issue. If you're in the tech realm, reaching out to your company and finding out, what role are they playing on an ongoing basis to help address this issue. I think it's really a matter of people leveraging the voice and power that they already have, right? And it can be from young people, young tech professionals, all the way to, I know some of our older uncles and aunties, I shouldn't say older, our wise uncles and aunties who have invested so much time in and their careers building in these companies. Now is a great opportunity to say, hey, look at all that I've invested in your company, support me in this philanthropic endeavor to be able to make some real differences in our communities. Let's practice giving back and utilizing that expertise. And a lot of that comes from harnessing your own voice and really reaching out to the leaders, to the people who have a seat at the table, both in these companies, in the nonprofit realm, and also in these public government positions who do influence, who control things like the money and the resources, because really we should be looking at more long-term infrastructure solutions. How are we going to make sure that every resident in Santa Clara County has access to the resources they need to connect to the internet, to have a device that's able to sustain things like Zoom right now, right? This takes an incredible amount of internet access, bandwidth, and it also takes, a device that's compatible with that. So I think those are some of those specific strategies to harness your impact that I think we should all be considering.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And it also makes me think about the ways that, our Pakistani community has so much privilege. Of course, many of us are Muslim, we are people of color, but even within that, our community has a lot of privilege, and many of our community members are in a position where they can help uplift other people. And I think that's a really important component when we talk about equity. I think equality is something we talk about often, but we don't always talk about equity. I'm really happy to see that your platform really emphasizes the need for equity. And I hope that for the participants that are listening right now, we can really understand how to help uplift and support people within our community and outside of our community to, help empower them and uplift them. Yeah, so my next question has to do with the importance of women in STEM. I want to understand your thoughts about how you individually are helping women in STEM, and also what impact can these women have on public service? What can their experience and knowledge help the public policy industry? What can they give to the industry?
Yeah, so hopefully I'm understanding the question correctly, but if you're talking about existing women in STEM, there's an incredible shortage of, or a lack of, women in STEM. And so one of the things from the education standpoint is really getting our young people to see models of inspiration, right? You need to be able to see someone in a role to be able to envision yourself. A lot of times it's easier, right? If you can see someone in that role, then you can see that pathway or that potential for yourself down the road. And so I would say, one of the great things, a lot of organizations starting up, they're looking for volunteers who can give back and to provide some mentorship, to provide, a day in their shoes of what it looks like to be a woman in STEM. Right? What types of jobs do these involve? What ways, in what ways are you able to make a difference in these roles? I think that can be incredibly inspiring and also allow young people to be able to envision themselves taking these steps to engage in that work, so that they're not just seeing men in these roles, because women can equally contribute to these spaces and need to be able to, in order to actually have sustainable industries that are inclusive of everyone and that really make a difference in all of the different areas that we need to be.
Yeah. Yes. Amazing. And then I just want to also talk, and I think you've already mentioned this a little bit, but what advice do you have for our youth, for the youth in our community, but for the youth worldwide? Why is it so important to be in public service? And as again a 20-year-old myself, I think sometimes it can be really discouraging to look at our current political climate, especially when you're a person from a marginalized. So can you talk about why it's so important for the younger generation to continue to stay involved and be involved in the future?
Yeah, I would definitely say that one of the reasons it's so important for young people to be involved in public service, or at least keep that pathway open, is that is a perspective, that we often are significantly missing when it comes to public policies or things that are also directly impacting young people. So when we're talking about education, for example, education involves, particularly K through 12 education, involves young people. So it'd be important to have young people involved in the policymaking process because they best understand, or they're closest to understanding what happens at that level, right? Or that age group or that time frame. I think so there's that aspect of bringing your experiences to the table because they actually impact things like policies. And then those are the systems levels, ability to make an impact at a systems level. And so I would say absolutely, yes, find specific issues or topics that really draw you in. Everyone's kind of able to eventually cultivate some area of passion, right? Identify those issues. Is it the environment? Is it medicine? Is it access to resources? What is it that you are passionate about and care deeply about? And what are you willing to, what pathway is best for you? Do you enjoy being an advocate? Sending letters, speaking publicly? Do you appreciate things like organization around specific issues, right? Are you a leader who likes to organize people and get them interested in a specific topic to then be able to take similar actions to advocate to specific leaders? Or are you ready to look at and consider this pathway for yourself? There's elected roles, there's appointed roles, there's, at the city and county level, at the state level. So I would encourage all of us really to look at, what are those roles? Am I interested in serving on the early library commission, early childhood and library commission? Is it health services? Is it transportation? What are you interested in pursuing? Because there are a lot of commissions and other pathways that are interested, that you might spark your interest, and then that could be your pathway into potentially other roles, or also being able to influence policies. And I would say not just to our young people, but to the people and individuals around us, right? A lot of our uncles and aunties, like, these are the types of things to have supportive conversations with young people about, right? It doesn't need to just be what our acceptable, jobs and careers are. Public policy and public service is an inspiring and a incredibly profound, it has an incredibly profound impact to our communities. So we should be encouraging each other and uplifting our young people, especially, to be able to take these steps and explore these realms.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I'm so glad that you also talked about, there's such a variety of different ways that people can become involved in public service. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a full-time job. You can do community organizing on the weekends, and you can write letters. There are so many different ways to be involved. And the other thing that you said that I really liked was, there are so many different things that impact us: the environment, affordable housing, affordable healthcare. And I think everyone can find a, certain policy stance or something that really stands out to them and can help them feel motivated and inspired. Yeah, thank you for that answer. So I want to transition to something a little bit more lighthearted. I know you have a very busy schedule. So what do you do in your spare time? And what things do you do to, kind of declutter your mind, to de-stress, and to, take care of your own mental health?
That's a great question. It's definitely been something that's challenging during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it impacts, so many of us in so many different ways. I think, to your point earlier, the school board role, my job as an elected school board member is not my full-time job. My full-time job is as a public school special education teacher in the neighboring district. And so being able to manage both roles and other roles that I've taken on in other organizations just on a voluntary basis can be incredibly challenging at times, being able to prioritize and organize and figure out. And I think one of the things that's really important is finding time. A lot of people call it like self-care, and self-care can look like a lot of different things. For me, it really looks like making sure I find, and actually sometimes even schedule in the time to connect with my family and loved ones and friends, right? Saving that time to be able to kind of make sure, check in on my family, see how everyone's doing. That's what feeds my soul, is being able to stay connected with them. I would also say, I guess, just a hobby of mine, especially during quarantine when it's, shelter in place and not really as easy to go out and about. I've always been interested, but it's been a really relaxing activity. It's just doing mehndi or henna, it's something that I'm able to do just to, access that creative side of my brain, and also honor, a tradition that's been, practiced in my family, obviously, and culturally for generations.
After the pandemic, you're gonna have to teach me. I've been trying for 20 years. I am so bad, but I'm gonna hit you up after this.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right, so we're closing the end, nearing the end of our interview section of our panel today. I have one last question, and then we're gonna move on to questions from the audience. So my last question is, if you want your audience to take one thing away about you, what would it be?
Wow. I don't know that it's necessarily about me, but one aspect of what motivates me that I think others should consider, right, is what aspect of public service should you be exploring or interested in, right? Like identifying that. For me, it wasn't as simple as like, oh, I just want to be a school board member. I honestly had no concept of what a school board member was even growing up. And so even just that aspect of exploring what are some different ways to get involved, even if I already have a full-time job, you know, what are other ways that I can make a difference and contribute and give back and utilize the skill sets that you already have. That would be, I guess, my main takeaway, you know, from today. If nothing else, I would encourage others to look at what aspect of public service they might be interested in.
Yeah, amazing. And I hope the audience members that are here right now can take that away, because I think you're totally right that there are so many ways that each of us can become involved and within our own capacity can do something for the betterment of, you know, our entire community. Okay, so I have a few questions from our Facebook Live feed. And just a reminder for our new attendees, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box in the Zoom or add them to the comment section on Facebook Live. So our first question is, what are different venues or platforms that IT and other professionals can use to help the community, and how should they approach it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this question is specific to the digital divide issue or just harnessing, I guess, your impact in general. But I do think there's a lot of different organizations, nonprofits and advocacy organizations that you can get involved in depending on what specific topic or area that you're interested in. I mentioned the Digital Equity Coalition as, you know, some of the work that's happening right here in the Silicon Valley around addressing the digital divide and these resources for residents here. But that work is actually extending across the state. So it really depends on, you know, what specific area you're interested in and the potential, because a lot of times some of these organizations or coalitions or groups, right, they identify different ways for you to make an impact, whether it's writing postcards to your legislator or organizing a Zoom meeting with you know, a county supervisor, or figuring out the best strategy of who some of these partner companies or organizations are and ways that they can contribute. There's a lot of different ways that it can be approached. So I would say starting by finding, you know, an organization or a group, a lot of times it can be easier to engage in that with others versus independently.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to ask a question from our Zoom Q&A. How do you keep the balance between family and public service related activities?
It takes a lot of time and practice and patience on everyone's end. It's definitely not easy. I will say that, but I think there are ways to, you know, make it manageable. I have specific times that I schedule into my day where, you know, it's family time and I'm committed to that. And then other times where, yes, I make some sacrifices to be able to be in this public role, whether it's attending school events, you know, my board meetings. So right now my board meetings happen twice a month, and then there's meetings in between and other events. But figuring out a schedule that's both, you know, I'm able to respect the needs that I have with my family, but also in the public eye or with public service, it is manageable. It takes a lot of scheduling and flexibility and understanding, and my family has been incredibly supportive with that. But it is a process to kind of undertake.
Yeah, I would totally have to agree with that. Just working on this campaign right now, I feel like I work 70-hour weeks and I don't see my family unless I'm like running around our home. So I agree. I'm going to have to learn some time management skills from you too. Okay. So our next question from Facebook is, are there ways school boards can invite speakers and professionals to connect with youth and give career advice and suggest activities like volunteer and internships to help them get to their career goals?
Yes, there are lots of different initiatives throughout the school year where we are looking for partnerships with companies or partnerships with individuals. I know one of the ones that stands out is we do have our STEAM Fair activity that happens at most of our school sites throughout the year. And so even just being able to, have professionals come and serve as judges for those STEAM Fair projects of, in all of those different science, technology, engineering, math related careers. I know we've had lots of volunteers come through. We also have an internship program running through a couple of our school sites, similar to job shadowing, which, some of our classes have gone and visited these companies or kind of watched. So I would definitely encourage, if you're interested in that or have time to give, please do reach out to myself or other school, your local school board communities, because I'm sure we're always looking for individuals who are able to give back, and I can't see us, rejecting that offer. So please do feel free, if you have time to give or have ideas or thoughts on extending that. We'd be happy to learn more.
Awesome. Okay, so we have another question from Facebook. You talked about digital divide, providing internet access and hardware. Are there any additional skills the community can help with?
Yeah, so specific to that issue, one of the things I know that we've, as we look at this issue from a state level, we know one of the issues that we're facing is with internet service providers. And, it's their prime market right now. Everyone needs access to the internet. And so although there are a lot of these programs right now that are saying, we are connecting vulnerable low-income families with internet at an affordable rate, what we're finding is a lot of times that internet or the bandwidth for that internet is not enough to sustain the activities that families actually need to access. So for example, distance learning, right? I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the bandwidth to maintain a video Zoom call, which is the primary way right now in Santa Clara County that students in a public school system are accessing their learning, it's oftentimes not enough to sustain that. So students are getting kicked off of Zoom, or they're getting bounced around, they're getting disconnected. So one of the asks that we're looking at is, how do we hold these internet service providers accountable to providing internet at a data rate at a speed that's actually sustaining the services that we need, without just increasing the costs, right? Because they are making an incredible amount of money off of especially some of our most vulnerable families. And so how do we make sure that they are, if they're marketing themselves as giving back to the community and doing all of these things, how can we also then use our voice and hold them accountable to providing the resource and the bandwidth needed to sustain these activities? I would say that's one aspect of, particular, getting into some of the depth around internet access and hardware particularly.
Yeah, okay, so another question we have is, are there any statewide efforts to coordinate activities or at a national level? How is the state and federal government helping schools in leading the digital landscape?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk and interest right now, both at the state level and nationally. Obviously, the national or the federal level, I should say the federal level education scape is a little bit tumultuous right now. There isn't quite as much because they're very focused on, okay, let's just reopen schools versus addressing this issue. This issue is going to transcend the pandemic. It was here, the issue of the digital divide was here prior to the pandemic, and it's going to be here after the pandemic. So the reality is that this is an issue that, it's not everyone is treating the same. You've got the federal government that is really focusing on this as, not as important as, state level wise. There is some interest around addressing the digital divide, also in rural areas that have a lot less internet connectivity. But I think one of the areas in particular, I mentioned the internet service providers. as well as long-term infrastructure. So what does it look like to have, for example, publicly available Wi-Fi to our communities? Here in the Silicon Valley, the Eastside Union High School District actually partnered with the city of San Jose to have community-based Wi-Fi that starts off at the school, but actually expands and covers the entire area, entire neighborhoods for students and families to be able to access. So looking at projects like that, where we're here in the Silicon Valley, we should really have, you'd think that internet connectivity is not an issue, but we already know that there were those 15,000 families that we needed to be able to connect immediately here in the Silicon Valley. So we're looking at what does this look like from the long-term perspective, looking at potential bonds, partnerships with nonprofits, partnerships with companies potentially, but again, looking for where they're able to give and contribute to this issue.
Awesome answer. Next question we have is, can you talk a bit about the public-private partnership in education? Any success stories for students?
There are instances. I know at the school site I work at, we do have a partnership with Verizon where they were able to provide one-to-one iPads. And I can tell you, teaching and learning would not be anywhere near as successful without those resources, right? So looking at digital innovation, the types of grants and things that when organizations are able to give back, when they're able to invest in the local community and almost see that as a pipeline, right? If we're able to, they talk about the school to prison pipeline, which is, lower income communities or communities that face a lot of challenges due to poverty, and how that, a child's third grade reading level may predict whether they're going to be in prison later on in life. So if we can almost think of that from the flip perspective of, if we are able to get more companies to invest in our communities, invest in our education and our school systems, then those resources are going to help these kids eventually turn into contributing members of society who are also being productive and potentially even, becoming employees at that company. So it's really a cycle that we do definitely need to consider. And I think there are some examples that, of companies that have tried to do this effectively, and definitely more work that can be done in that realm.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we're talking about it, because this is definitely the audience that we need to talk about this too, and make sure that we are doing what we can. Companies are doing what they can to combat the digital divide. Okay, so we have one more question. How are schools preparing for the long-term strategy to return to school, and will remote learning be an option?
Yeah, so that's definitely a hot topic right now. I think everyone is honestly still trying to figure it out. There's a lot of planning in process. We actually have, in the Franklin-McKinley School District, we have several committees that are looking at all the options and all the supports and protective protocols that would need to be in place in order to even consider some of these hybrid models. But there's still a lot of unknown. The county, specifically here in Santa Clara County, we just moved into California's orange tier. And so there's a lot of questions still around, what's the timeline between moving back and forth potentially with these tiers. I think one of the things that we look at is, our particular district where it's situated is one of the highest, has one of the districts with some of the highest zip codes for COVID-19 positive cases and also fatalities. So I think all of that information collectively are things that we're considering in terms of planning for, what the strategy is. We know it's also going to take transition, even just getting from, the spring, which was kind of like an emergency situation where everyone just had, schools closed and we were forced to kind of quickly come up with a plan to starting off the school year this year. Our district started off with full distance learning. So I think there's a lot that goes into figuring out what strategy is best. And ultimately, as we get closer so right now our board made the decision to essentially keep schools in full distance learning through the end of December. And we will be revisiting that decision in the coming month to assess whether we can look at some type of hybrid in-person model in addition to distance learning, but always trying to provide parents with as many choices as possible as well.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience as a teacher in terms of remote learning, and then also maybe expand a little bit about what the board has learned over this period of time to make remote and distance learning a little bit easier?
Yeah, so with my experience with distance learning or teaching remotely has definitely been challenging. I teach special education, and so there's a lot of aspects of that when working with students with disabilities that, you know, a lot of the things that we do in person are very hands-on. And so trying to navigate through all of that, trying to provide students with services that are accessible even virtually is incredibly challenging. So I think a lot of the things that we've learned is ensuring, you know, primarily has been on the digital divide, because that's one way that we can ensure students are receiving services and supports at a more intensive level. I think just being able to have somewhat of a face-to-face has helped, and also looking at, you know, the types of supports that kids were getting in person, whether it was like modular furniture or fidget tools or, you know, specific type of study corral, whatever a student needs, being able to provide that for the student at home so that they can also, you know, to the extent possible, be successful with the support of those tools as well. So those are all things that we're continuing to constantly explore, looking at new programs, looking at things that are better able to support students. It's a constant process, right? Because we're all kind of learning in this together and making decisions based on how things are changing.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk a little bit about the lessons you've learned, you know, sitting on the board, and can you highlight some challenges and opportunities that you've seen?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of different work. You know, I know my website will be shared later on, so you'll be able to see kind of a scope of some of the issues or topics that I've worked on specifically. I'd say, you know, one of the challenges is definitely the state funding system and ways that our public school districts are funded. We have in my district particularly, we have a high number of students who are English language learners, who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and who are foster or homeless youth. And so that also presents a lot of challenges. It's also an opportunity to think about how we're providing, you know, more individualized programming to support the needs of all of these different, you know, students and the way that those needs present. So I would definitely say some of the challenges has been, you know, figuring out how to work within the budget, right? Prioritizing the areas that support students first and foremost, and even having to look at things like cuts, right? How do you make cuts furthest away from the classroom so that they don't impact, you know, to the least extent possible, impact the kids and learning. And then there's definitely, you know, a lot of opportunities. I talked a little bit about how, you know, as a Pakistani Muslim woman, you know, what does that identity look like in the space of policy? I talked a little bit about the dual language program. There's other ways as well. For instance, when we're looking at things like purchasing new curriculum, right? So being able to ask those questions like, does this curriculum, you know, how culturally diverse or inclusive is this curriculum? Being able to push back on some of those has also opened up a lot more opportunities in terms of making sure our students have access to resources that reflect their identity, that feel inclusive and supportive of their development.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so this is the last question. What are your long-term goals and what is next for you?
Oh. You know, I often get that question asked a lot. And honestly, for me, it's really great. I really appreciate the position that I'm in now, because I'm able to take my day job. Well, I shouldn't just say day job because it consumes most of my life, but my role as a teacher, you know, being able to see what's happening in the classroom, what's working with students, what do teachers need to be successful in supporting their students? How do you facilitate parent teacher communication to support the whole child? Looking at that realm and understanding how all of that knowledge and experience and expertise is able to inform my role on the school board. Granted, they're not the same school district. So there are some aspects of differing needs, but when you're looking at structural things like systems and policies, I really appreciate right now the fact that I have that parallel there. It makes me well equipped to be able to address and express my perspective when giving input on these policies and decisions. I wouldn't say it's off the table for me. I'm never going to say never, especially after going down this whole pathway of public service in general. I think it's really just looking at, for me, it's looking at, what is the level of impact that I'm trying to make right now? Is my current role, am I able to do that in my current role? And if I am, like I am now, I'm content with doing this work. There's still a lot of work to be done. So I do see myself in this role on the school board, which is why I decided to run for re-election for this seat, because I do feel there's an incredible amount of work still left to be done. But that really hasn't stopped me, and it shouldn't stop others either. From looking at, like, what does my impact look like in terms of advocacy at the state level? What does my networking and communication look like when it comes to connecting with other leaders across the nation, and even potentially internationally, right? What does this look like to create this network so that when there are these issues like digital equity, how am I able to connect with all of these different individuals so that we can be successful in making these gains? So those are, I think, the long answer to my long-term plans, but really just looking again at what my impact is and how I can continue to sustain that work.
Yeah, there's actually one more question that I want to ask from Facebook. Do you have any resolution on the ballot you like and would like to let the audience know?
Oh, I have a number of ballot measures. Proposition 15, I will name that. It's really supporting, it's the Schools and Communities First initiative. So providing, to each district, I know in our district, we're getting several millions of dollars annually. Should Proposition 15 pass, which I'm encouraging individuals to vote yes on Prop 15. For that reason, is it's not attacking small businesses or homeowners, but rather large corporations who haven't been paying their fair share in property taxes. And so being able to utilize that source of income, I talked about the budgetary impacts. So I would say definitely yes on Prop 15, Prop 16 with affirmative action. We need to start looking at, I know it's a difficult conversation a lot of times in our DISI community, but really looking at a lot of privilege that we have and how are we ensuring that people have equitable opportunities, and equity doesn't always mean equal. So I would definitely encourage people to vote yes on Prop 16. There's Measure K, which is our local school district measure, which would definitely help us prevent us from having to make cuts. So look at your local school district measures and really see, how is your school board doing? More often than not, we don't want to make cuts. We know that education is really where we should be investing in. So I really encourage folks to take a look at those measures as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight. And thank you so much for answering these questions. I feel really, really happy to be here with you because I've learned so much. I really do feel inspired. And it's a constant battle for me to, I go to school in Washington, D.C. I am constantly I can't even leave my room without, politics are just everywhere. And it's hard. It's hard as a Muslim American. It's hard as a woman. And I'm so happy that there are people like you in my own community who are, making it, just inspiring us, giving us the advice that we need. And I'm really happy to be here, and I hope to connect with you afterwards too, because I need some help.
Absolutely.
So can you we're gonna show your website and then also your Digital Equity Coalition website. But before we do that, do you have any final words for the audience?
I just want to say, thank you for taking the time thank you to Open for this opportunity. Everybody, really appreciate the great questions. And just, keep your options open. Look at ways that you can continue to make that impact, because I think we all have those experiences and our own expertise and our own ways to be able to give back. Even if you have a full-time job, even if you're incredibly busy, there's always those pockets of time, even if it's on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. Whatever those opportunities are, find them so that you can help give back as well.
Awesome. Okay, so here's your website. Do you want to run us through the key parts of your website?
Sure. I would say priorities will probably give you a lot of the issues that I've worked on the school board, and some of the things that we've been able to accomplish and continue working on. So if you scroll through those issues, if you see something that you want to learn more about, please feel free to reach out to me. So these were the 3 areas that I've been focusing on: equity, and safety and environment, as well as community building. So there's a lot of links also on there for you to go through if you're interested. There's resources right now with navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, which is another tab on the website. And then of course, all of my contact information is also available through the contact tab, or also at the very bottom for my social media site. So happy to connect and support and work with individuals, again, whether it's through kind of the advocacy work that I've done, or whether it's more of a teaching, question, or as an elected leader. I'm always happy to engage with folks on a number of those issues.
Awesome. And then can you speak a little bit about the Digital Equity Coalition?
Yeah, so this is, again, it's kind of a newer project that we've worked on specifically with this coalition, but as one of the co-founders, I'm working with other educators, elected leaders, just individuals in the community who are looking to make a difference on addressing the digital needs of our community. So we were able to kind of accomplish a lot of our short-term emergency solutions. I talked about the $15.3 million. And that was a result of our advocacy efforts to provide hotspots and the Chromebooks or other connectivity devices, the funding for those data plans. There's also a lot of links and sources to better understand the issue. And then some of our goals in terms of long-term infrastructure solutions, specific to Santa Clara County, but also more broadly, how we're extending these efforts at the state level. So there's also our email and contact information. Should you be interested in getting more involved in this topic.
Awesome. On behalf of Open Silicon Valley, I want to thank you sincerely for being here with us today. We're really excited to continue our conversations with you and support you in whatever way we can. Thank you for all of the insight you've provided us in this past hour. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure all of the audience members have learned a lot. And I also want to thank all of the attendees for joining us this Saturday morning. I hope all of you have a great Saturday.
Yes, thank you so much, and hope everyone's staying safe and healthy as well. Thank you.
Thank you all.